So, welcome to today's webinar, Compliance in Action, a DoD Contractor's Road to 110. I am so excited to be a part of this conversation. Those of you who don't know who I am Noelle Vestal. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer over at PreVeil. In a previous life, I was the CIO actually at a small defense contractor where I too had to go through the journey of implementing the 110 NIST 171 controls. So, if anybody understands the pain points that we're about to talk about today, it is definitely me. And we're here today to share a real world success story with one of our customers. And I think it'll be incredibly valuable for anyone navigating the CMMC landscape and the implementation process for sure. So, with that, let me take a moment to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. First, we have Brad from MAD Security. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Brad?
Yes, I'm Brad Proctor, the Director of Operations at MAD Security, and been in the defense industry for a while. Similar to Noel, I was a IT manager prior to coming to MAD and helping other clients achieve CMC level 2. And MAD Security is the Security Operations Center, primarily focused on the defense industrial base. So from compliance to actual security operations center and monitoring, that is what we do. This industry is what we focus on.
Love that. Thank you so much, Brad. Dave, would you like to tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. So I'm Dave Jackson. I'm the Director of Technology at LSI, and my role in CMMC is to have assume the role of security manager and then help facilitate our journey with the MAD team to get to CMMC compliance.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Dave. And last but certainly not least, Marty, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, good afternoon or good morning, whatever the case may be. Marty Tater, I'm a Vice President of Technology at LSI and also taking on the role of CISO as it pertains to the CMMC procedures and policies. David and I worked closely together getting LSI along with MAD, getting LSI to where we're at today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And cannot thank you all enough for joining us. This is such an amazing story to tell. And with that, let's dive in a little bit more into the webinar we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I want to mention is LSI, who is a PreVeil customer. They have an incredible story to tell. Originally, I believe it was a -71 was your SPUR score. Is that correct?
That is correct. We were a -71 after our first assessment.
Thank you. And now having a perfect 110. So it's quite the story to tell. So I think it'll be really awesome to have an in-depth conversation about how you guys got there and how you used our partner network to help you get there. We're just going to go over the three-prong approach that we have at PreVeil to compliance so that everybody is familiar real quick. So here's our three-pronged approach at PreVeil. So obviously we have our technology solution. For those of you who are not familiar, that is a technology solution that is compliant. As you see here, we meet DFAR C through Gs, FedRAMP equivalent, 140-2 validated, ITAR compliant, all of those things. That is from an email and file storage standpoint. The other prong of our three-prong approach is our documentation that we have, and we have a huge documentation support program that I'll talk about a little bit more later in our conversation called the Accelerator. And then our third prong is what we're going to be really focusing a lot on today, which is our partner network. So we have multiple partners like MAD Security who are working with us as managed service providers or CMMC consultants or any number of different types of support institutions that you may want to reach out to in your compliance journey. So now that we've sort of had a very overarching conversation about how PreVeil can assist our customers, it's probably going to be a good idea to then dive into how it is that the partner network and our partners really assisted LSI to get to where they are. But I know that, I believe, Dave, you had a slide that you wanted to show talking about LSI, if you'd like to do that.
So we're a system integrator. We do factory automation as our primary line of business. We have offices pretty well scattered out throughout the states now, and have begun the journey to have some DoD projects that are becoming viable in our pipeline, which helped prompt us to get prepared for getting CMMC certification. Marty can probably elaborate a little bit better from our senior management point of view where that direction came.
Yeah, so we had our CEO tasked us with becoming CMMC certified as David mentioned, we were seeing some opportunities through Army Corps of Engineers, as well as some of the national labs that are in our vertical industry, control systems. Our CEO, being forward thinking, that's his job, to think a long time down the road, suggested that we start down this journey, this path, as it would be a separator for us. And it would be unfair of me to say that we're one of one, because I don't know the actual answer to that. But I think it certainly would be fair to say that we're one of at least a handful. We currently have our CMMC certification.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview on what LSI does and why it was that you decided to go with CMMC certification in the first place. And Brad, I would be remiss if I don't give you an opportunity to talk about MAD.
So, MAD Security is a 24/7 security operations center, as I mentioned earlier. We are a external service provider in the CMMC context. We are also CMMC Level 2 certified, and we were certified against our actual SRM, so our shared responsibility matrix. So all the services we offer, we ingest ourselves, which means that we're assessed against that, which says that those services, just in LSI's context, because our certification was prior to theirs, and it did make it go a little bit smoother for them. But all the services we offer align with CMC requirements, and we focus on the cybersecurity aspect and not just bringing that compliance, but also the security context.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brad. So before we dive into the rest of the story around LSI and MAD and how they got to that 110, I want to make sure that if there's anybody out there who's a little bit newer to CMMC, that we have a quick overview of the CMMC landscape. The CMMC requirements, if you are not familiar with them, are actually just an extension of the requirements in the DFARS 7012 or 7012 regulation that quite a few DoD contractors have. If you are in any way dealing with CUI, controlled unclassified information, you most likely have a DFARS 7012 clause. And in fact, some people who aren't dealing with CUI directly right now still have the clause in place so that at any time the government does want to share CUI, they can do that in a compliant manner. So when I say DFAR 7012 and this compliance and everything, well, what am I actually referencing? What I'm referencing is a standard called NIST, that's NIST 800-171 or 800-171. That is 110 controls and 320 objectives. If you're not familiar with the objective and control relationship, just at a very high level, every control has at minimum one objective underneath it. And you can think of the objectives sort of as individual tasks that have to be checked off in order for that control to be considered totally and fully implemented and for you to get credit for it. Now, let's say that, maybe, LSI, obviously you guys did a great job and got 110, fantastic. What if there wasn't 110 the first time? What if maybe there are a couple of little things that you needed to address? If you have a minimum of an 88 out of 110, and there are a whole bunch of caveats with this, if you want more information on this particular program I'm about to talk about, you can find that out in the CMMC Assessment Procedure Guide that's available online, or the CAP. And what it talks about inside the CAP is that an 88 is the minimum score to be considered on the Limited Deficiency Correction Program, or commonly referred to as the POAM plan, or the Plan of Actions and Milestones. Again, we're not going to be talking about that much here, but there is an option where you could conceivably have POAMs that you could answer after your assessment, but truly always try to go for that one time whenever you can. So with all of that and that sort of further ado, the other thing that I wanted to just talk about really quickly is just some updates to the CMMC final rule. So we have this timeline graphic here. You'll see on the left-hand side, we have the CMMC final rule that went into effect on December 16th, 2024. We started CMMC C3 PAO assessments, you see here in January of 2025. And we were expecting to see CFR 48, which is that little blue box on the right-hand side. We were expecting to see that sometime in the first, maybe the second quarter of this year. However, as of about a week ago, what we've now heard is that at some point this summer, and definitely before the end of the fiscal year, which would be the 30th, or I believe the 31st of August this year, CFR 48 will most likely come out and become effective. CFR 48 is the companion legislation to the CMMC final rule. CFR 48, once it does actually come into contracts, that is the ability, it grants the legal ability to the government contracts people who are going to be adding it to contracts. It just gives them the implementation process they need to follow that. Once that happens, CMMC will be able to be added to contracts. In fact, we already know that there are going to be some pre-designated and decided upon contracts. We don't know which ones those are yet, but the DoD has identified over 150 contracts this year that are likely going to have CMMC requirements attached to them. And with this quote at the bottom, love this, Katie Arrington, who is the founder of CMMC and is also performing the duties of the DoD CIO right now. CMMC is not pausing. CMMC is going to stay in place, and there is no question about that. So even though we see some regulation hurdles kind of happening a little bit right now, it's just going to slow down. It's not going to go away. So it's something good to remember. And for those of you that have that DFAR 7012 clause, remember, CMMC is just validating your requirement to already be in compliance with NIST 800-171. So just wanted to make sure we level set that for everyone. And now let's dive into the meat and potatoes of this story. So I will ask this of either Dave or Marty. I know you guys talked about this a little bit, but if you could go a little bit more in depth, what was the motivation for LSI to pursue CMMC at this point?
We needed to increase our security posture for sure. And so the CEO, again, he tasked us with, let's go for the gusto and try to get CMMC. At the time, it was level 3, I believe, but then that changed later and became level 2. Our CEO believes in things that differentiate us from our competitors, and he saw this as a big differentiator. And so that was really the instigation for all of it. And then as it moved forward, we realized how much it was improving our overall security posture, I think. As these policies and procedures got rolled out, it really has improved overall our security posture. So
that's wonderful to hear. I think, that's a very good point that I think a lot of us forget. I know I forgot when I was implementing these things sometimes because you get so frustrated that this isn't just a checking the box. This really is, helping to secure everything that you have in your environment. And like you said, make things more effective. You have everything documented now. It can make a lot of your processes and procedures a little bit cleaner, it sounds like. That's wonderful. And I know that you guys had a first assessment. Dave, would you like to talk about or maybe walk us through what that experience was like and what was your reaction like when you got that first score?
About to answer that question, I joined the team after the first assessment, and then we started all of our internal remediations. So
yeah, I'd be happy to take that one though
Right.
for you, Dave. So we had our initial assessment was actually in 2021, and MAD Security did that for us. When we got it, I can't really say I was that surprised. We got a -71, but we had no idea what the scale even was for that. And being engineers, you got to give me a scale, right, before I can tell you if I'm good or bad.
Absolutely.
But then we actually started the virtual compliance manager program with MAD Security in 2023. It's when we really started down the path of remediating all of those things. So we had that list for a couple of years, and we started creating our policies and doing all that stuff. And then we brought MAD in to help us finalize all that and beginning in 2023.
Wow. So I know that there was a bid maybe that was affecting some of this too. I know post your initial assessment, like you said, there were a couple years, you weren't really necessarily focusing it on too much. Was there some impetus or some reason why you started really focusing on getting everything implemented and getting that assessment done?
I mentioned earlier that we do some work for Army Corps of Engineers, which is of course part of DoD. And we had a project that can't really talk a lot about it because, of course,
Understood.
ADAs and that kind of stuff. But
Sure.
we had an RFP, which is a request for proposal, on a fairly large project, and they required you to enter a score from CMMC. And we, at the time, we were, I won't say hesitant. I mean, we entered our -71. It was the only score we had. Come to find out, we're probably the only ones that bid that even had a score. So
Wow.
-71 is better than not even being able to enter anything.
Absolutely.
So, but I think we realized then that, man, we got to close these gaps. We got to get this thing done because we're going to start seeing this in these bids. So that was the impetus really to get this thing, really push it to the finish line. It still takes a lot of time. I don't want anybody to down a primrose path. I think it's in the very beginning, we were told by someone that, oh, we can have this done in 6 weeks. And even I thought there's no way this organization ain't doing anything in 6 weeks, not at this size. But yeah, it took us 2 years.
Yeah, and that we've heard that story too. But it sounds like there definitely once there was more of that push, when you had that contract, it sounds like that's really what sort of got you over the finish line to get to that 110. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely.
It's such a good point. I'm glad you brought up the RFPs. There are so many RFPs and RFIs. So those are requests for proposals, requests for information. Also, blanket purchase agreements, which are BPAs, they're more and more increasingly are coming out with themselves being CUI. So you have to have a place to put CUI safely. And also, like you said, Marty, with that requirement long term to have CMMC certification. So glad you brought that up. So once you figured out, okay, yep, we're going to go ahead and do this, putting your nose to the grindstone, we're going to work on it. What was the decision that I know that you were PreVeil customers, but what was the other solutions that you used? I think it was a Microsoft solution. What was that?
Well, the other solution was GCC, but kind of how we got there was the Enclave, I think. So,
And Brad, please feel free to include any information here too. I know from the technology piece as well.
Yeah, and I remember this conversation very well. It was right after they LSI came back, and after the 2 years of kind of working things themselves, did our virtual compliance management program, and the first part we start really talking about is scope. And I remember Marty saying, "How can we do this to make sense?" Right, and
That's a great question right there.
yeah, for LSI. And so we started walking through, okay, here's what you have. Here's how far you've gotten. What can you do internally? What infrastructure do you have? How can we structure something where you can process, store, and transmit CUI? And so they had a commercial tenant in Microsoft 365. They had a GCC tenant. And then we started talking about, okay, is this data could potentially be ITAR? How do we best position you to be able to accept all that data? And then how do you work it internally, right? What are your business processes, not just, hey, here's the solution. And so for that conversation, we ended up with the enclave that was controlled from a physical perspective and a logical perspective. And then how they transmit data is PreVeil and GCC, depending on what the circumstance is.
And this is such an interesting setup. So I'm really glad that we're talking about it because we do have so many of our customers who just use the commercial 365 because that's what they had. But in this case, there was an existing GCC tenant that they wanted to use, which just highlights again how flexible PreVeil is. You can use this in tandem with pretty much anything that you're doing. We don't really cause problems as a technology with other interactive technologies. Did you have any issues with installing PreVeil with GCC, Brad, or were there any technology issues that you came into?
No, there weren't from our side. I know on the LSI side, if there was any sticking points, but from what I understand, it was very straightforward.
Wonderful. We love hearing that. And just like you said, let's dive a little bit more into those technologies and those architectures and maybe, some of those areas where there might have been some issue. So we were talking about GCC. So was that GCC environment that was something that was set up and managed by MAD? Is that correct?
No, that was
yeah.
managed by LSI.
Okay. So LSI, you already had a pre-existing GCC tenant, and then MAD assisted you in getting PreVeil installed with it as well. Is that correct?
That's probably accurate. Yeah. Yes.
It all evolved together. So
Yes. Right.
So very holistic approach with both solutions.
yes.
That's
Mhm.
correct.
That makes total sense. And I know that you were using email specifically in PreVeil. Were there any issues that you had with configuring your email or setting it up so you could use it or anything like that?
So neither David nor I actually set up the configuration of that, but I can just tell you that there were no issues because we would have heard about it if there were issues, and so it went pretty smooth.
It's a good indicator, right? No, and this is good news.
No news is good news, right?
Excellent. No, that's wonderful. So I also know too, and this is something that we tell customers all the time, but I really love this is a perfect example of it. You had a pre-existing GCC tenant that you went ahead and used with PreVeil. You also had, I know, some pre-existing other security different solutions. I believe like your firewall, for example, were you able to redeploy a lot of different solutions that you already had set up internally at LSI?
Well, go ahead, David, if you want to take that.
Sure. So once we decided to what the boundaries of our enclave were going to be, both physical and logical, which really set the whole path for making this a very viable internal project for us and our workflows. We needed a Meraki firewall. We had one. It was in IT inventory. It met all the requirements, everything that we needed. So our IT group prepared us a dedicated internet connection. We put the Meraki and the locked up cabinet in the enclave and connected our machines running GCC to them. And it became very economical for us to deploy as a fully vetted and viable solution without spending tremendous amounts of money. So
That right there is the point, right? We want to be able to get compliant and not spend, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to do it. So that's a really great point, and I know a lot of the listeners in the audience right now are thinking about, well, hey, what do I have that I could reuse? And it's not just firewalls. It could, maybe you have an antivirus that would work really great for your CUI boundary, and maybe you have an event management tool that would work, or a vulnerability scanner. So you can start looking at the solutions you have already in place and maybe save yourself some time and some money. I love the fact, David, what you just said too about scoping your boundary and how important that was. Like you said, you have to scope your boundary in order to understand what you really need. So, this is why we always say all the time the first step should be scoping your boundary. If you do not know where you have CUI in your organization, how are you going to protect it? If you don't know how CUI is coming into your organization, how are you going to protect it? If it's leaving your organization and you don't know how are you going to protect it? So, scoping your boundary is by far the most important step you're going to take. And it sounds like in your case, it really did help quite a bit in making this a little bit easier to figure out. So, now that we talked a little bit about the technology, I want to talk about the elephant in every room when it comes to compliance, which is documentation. There's quite a bit of documentation that is required in CMMC compliance. I know that you had said, Marty, that you guys had started kind of working on some policy and procedure documents after your first initial assessment with MAD. Can you just sort of expand a little bit on that process?
We actually used an online policy generator, a tool. And we did actually generate all of the policies necessary for the CMMC. That took us quite a while. We had a team that did that. And then once we got done with that, that's when we brought MAD in through the VCM process. And some of those policies, obviously, they change. And CMMC made some changes during our process that caused a lot of angst. And we had to update a lot of numbers and different things like that. So hopefully the folks in the crowd, if you're just getting started, you won't have to go through that. Yeah, so there's a lot of policies that anybody that's going to go down this journey, you're probably going to have to create, I'm assuming. And, most every organization is going to have some policy or some gap that you're going to have to close. We had a lot of gaps that we had to close, quite honestly. So in the beginning, it was mostly policies, and then procedures that are kind of come from that, right? Later. Yeah, that was sort of our journey, was on our own doing all of that, and then bringing MAD Security through the VCM process. They just had a lot of I'll call it tribal knowledge. They had been through this process. So if you've never been through this process, you don't really know what to expect.
That is so true. It is so true. Every assessment always has its little unique flavor to it. None of them are ever exactly the same. Thank you for that background information. And just as a quick plug for PreVeil solutions that we have from a compliance standpoint that I referenced earlier in the webinar, we have something now that unfortunately didn't exist when LSI needed it, but we do have something called the PreVeil Compliance Accelerator that does actually assist with that mountain of documentation that you have to complete. We have a system security plan template that's filled out about half the way for you already. And then we also just sort of invented a fake company and created all of those procedural policy documents that Marty was just talking about. Do you feel like, Marty, it would have been advantageous for you, would have helped to have already had, a pre-listed, here's all the documents for an example company, now go. Do you think that would have cut down on your overall time for that documentation creation?
Well, there's no doubt it would have cut down on the time. The lessons learned out of doing it on your own and the pain of going through that is probably, at the end, you can look back and say, well, it's good that we did that because now we understand a lot more of it. But the sheer amount of work that went into all that, oh, if you'd have had something, we would have used it a million times over for sure.
Well, next time we've got you, no problem. Thank you so much for that.
For somebody just getting in is because I was not CMMC oriented at all. The numbering system for all these documents, it's like, this is kind of bizarre and it doesn't make a lot of sense until you dig in it and you know how you reference the things together. But it's a learning curve for sure.
That is the truest statement right there. I tell people all the time, my background is in IT. I've spent, decades in the DoD running IT programs. My master's is in IT. I've got IT certifications. I took one look at NIST 101 and was like, I don't understand any of this. This doesn't make any sense to me. It's a totally different language. It really is. Like you
Yeah.
said, you have to really understand it. And if you have, somebody like PreVeil or, the support we can offer you on the compliance team, why not take it, right? Because this stuff is really overwhelming. And you know what, you might as well take my expertise. I've already gone through all the crazy and shed all the tears and pulled my hair out. So I'm happy to help so that you don't have to. Wonderful. Thank you so much both for your input on that. Now, during the assessment, so this is something that I know a lot of people have questions about because I think some people feel like the assessment process is kind of mysterious and they're not sure what to expect or what's going to happen or any of that sort of thing. So I know that you worked with a C3 PAO, and for those of you who don't know what that means, that's a certified third-party assessor organization, and they are the CMMC assessment groups. I know you worked with a C3 PAO, and I believe they are also a partner of PreVeil, if I'm not mistaken. And so you had two PreVeil partners. You had MAD on the one side helping you implement your technologies, and a C3 PAO partner of PreVeil on the other side. Do you think that that made the assessment a little bit smoother for you when you went through it?
I mean, I would say for sure that's part of the reason, we didn't know what C3PAOs were. I thought it was something out of Star Wars, honestly.
What we all, right?
So we kind of reached out to MAD Security, who was our partner in that, and said, hey, can you suggest one of these? And they suggested Centaur. And so that was somebody that they had. Brad can comment on whether there's a partnership there or not. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it was somebody that they were familiar with. And so that helped for sure.
Yeah, it's a trusted C2PO is what it comes down to. There's a lot of different ones out there. And I think from the standpoint of, hey, LSI is going through with PreVeil, Centaur as a partner with PreVeil and a C2PO, they have that understanding of what it means to assess something that's not FedRAMP authorized, that has gone through the process, knows how to look at the body of evidence, knows how to accept those things. And there's really no questions asked. It's just that's very easy.
We love.
Yeah, well, some of those things during our assessment, I think when we said it's PreVeil and this is how we receive our CUI or whatever, there wasn't really a lot of other questions from the assessors. I think they were familiar with all that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we always tell our customers if you can use one of our partners, that's the way to go. And in your case, you did it twice, which was even better. So that in-week assessment, what was that experience like? Was it stressful? I'm sure it was probably a little nerve-wracking, but what was the overall experience there?
They did their job. They asked their questions. We gave them their responses that they were looking for. But prior to all of that, we did a lot of work with MAD and prepared ourselves and went through this huge dry run process about 4 weeks in front of our actual assessment visit. The assessment first part was all via Teams, so we were not in person. They only came for the site visit inspection, which I was a little apprehensive about because, it's like you want to read the body language in the room, right? And sort of see how things are going. But everything that they asked, we had the proper answers for, and we were, everything was prepared. So it was actually a lot less stressful event than we anticipated. So.
Well, that right there, the fact that it was less stressful than you thought is amazing, right? I think that's very impressive. And it sounds like your preparation is what helped you be able to, have it sounds like a pretty easy assessment. I hate to use easy, but it sounds like it wasn't too bad. Do you think that pre-assessment or, mock assessment or gap analysis, whatever you want to call it, that activity you did with MAD before you had your final assessment, how important do you think that was to your overall preparation?
Oh, that was the busiest 4 weeks of the journey afterwards, so that we made sure we closed all of our little and they weren't big gaps. So there'll be micro things here and there, where is the sign-in sheet for the enclave? Well, it really needs to be on the outside instead of me go in because I'm authorized to go get it and then sign everybody in. So just the little procedural things about where everything was at. So when they came, it was, everything was in the right spot, their IDs
So-
were checked when they got in the building, the whole procedures and processes, everything flowed just like it was supposed to.
So Noelle mentioned earlier, and I know she maybe didn't want to get too deep into this, but you can POAM stuff. Okay. So if you don't have the 110 out of 110, you can POAM certain items. When you look at that list, and they have this, I don't remember what that list was called. There are some items that are not POAMable, and they're really weird, the ones that they,
They are.
when you look at it, you would be like, oh, I should be able to POAM that, but they don't allow you to. So when we did our pre-audit, I focused the team on, look, we got to go through these things that have a level 5 and make sure 1000% that we have every bit of this covered. If some of this other stuff isn't covered and it's POAMable, we'll just POAM it. So I think if you're preparing for an audit, start there, right? Start with the level 5 stuff, the 4 and 5, maybe. Is that right? 4 and 5 is not POAMable?
1 and 3 and 5. So yeah, the 3s and 5s. Yep.
Okay. Or that doesn't, there's not a 4, right?
Yeah.
They get some weird.
I know they're skipping numbers everywhere. I know.
Yeah.
No, that's actually an extremely good point. So what Marty is talking about is that CMMC assessment procedural document that I was referencing earlier, the CAP. If you go on the Cyber AB's website, you can download the CAP, and that is literally the assessment process that all assessors have to follow. And it will give you information. It'll give you that list of all those controls that are POAMable and all the others are not. And I think it's about 52 of them, and they're pretty much all, I believe, 1-pointers. So what Marty was talking about is some controls have 5-point values, some have 3-point values, some have 1-point values. The ones that are 1-point values usually can be POAMed, but again, be very careful and make sure that you read all the information about POAMs. And there are some stipulations on what can and can't be POAMed even within that list. So definitely research that. But absolutely true, Marty. We've had multiple customers, especially it's towards the beginning when we were first really starting out with those joint surveillance voluntary assessments we did last year. We had a lot of people who were taking more advantage of the POAM piece. But yeah, absolutely, very good point to bring up.
So there was one other thing to add to that, Noel, which is not only is it not POAMable, it's an immediate end of your assessment.
Yeah.
You just got to start over.
Mhm.
So it's not just that, oh, well, okay, we'll come back to that. No, you got to start all the way over. So it's what we were told. No,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And you'd have to pay that money again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely don't want to pay for 2 assessments when I only need 1. So it's understandable. That's a very good point. Thank you, Marty. Real quick before we close out this part of the conversation, what piece of document or what evidence do you think, other than the system security plan, that the assessors use the most? What were they looking at the most to get their answers to their questions in the assessment outside of the system security plan?
They really wanted, everything had to have some screenshot or a document, that we had, like if you say you're logging stuff, then you got to show them a log, right? And they want to see it. If you tell them something happens a certain way, then they want to see a screenshot. Like, for instance, one of the big things was separation of duties, for instance. And so then they wanted us to log on as this person and prove that we couldn't do something we're not supposed to do. So stuff like that is real important to at least to the assessors we had. And so we had to go and prove that to them through a screen share, through a screenshot, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. Thank you. And that's something good to remember for those of you out there who are maybe starting your process or really just haven't been assessed yet. It's so important that you be able to validate everything you're saying that you're doing. So like Marty's point, if you say you're doing these logs and you're doing them at this time, well, I need to be able to see that that's true. I need to be able to see validated evidence that you have been doing that. That's an excellent.
Yeah. And to expand on that a little bit, Noel, that's actually, the assessors actually told us that it's not so important how you're doing it. It's what's important is that the way you say you're doing it, that's the way you're doing it.
Absolutely. Consistency. Yep.
Yeah.
I would add to that is that they're going through multiple assessments, including LSIs from a external service provider perspective, is however it's documented, the assessor is going to try to make their best interpretation of how you can demonstrate that. That does not mean that when the assessor asks you to demonstrate a certain way, that that's what you have to do. That's why the dry run is so important, because you go through and say, I'm going to show it this way. Here's how I know I can show it. And that's what you stick to. I'll give you an example is that if, let's say you had a system where you say you have data retention for 1 year. Let's say that system hasn't been operating for 1 year and the assessor asks you to show a log that's greater than 300 days. You can't do it, but you can show the capability that the system's configured to do that. And so you have to just be ready and go back to how your playbook looks to be able to do what the assessor, to show the assessor what they need to see based on your implementation.
That's a really good point. Like, I love that you just said, just because the assessor asks you for it this way, doesn't mean you have to show it that way. You just want to be able that you show something that can be validated against the objectives and controls. Like, that's an extremely good point. There are a lot of different interpretations. This has been such a great conversation. And
That's another. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, please go ahead.
It's another thing that sort of gets back to the pre-audit. And what I felt like that was so important is we literally had all of this through the dry run. I mean, I had a great team. I'm gonna be honest with you. I had a great team, but we had them queue all that stuff up. So they were just tabs on, they were screenshots or they were tabs on an Internet Explorer. Well, they don't use that anymore, but it's this gray beard telling on me here. But anyway, all that stuff was queued up. So it wasn't like we had to go dig for it, and take 5 minutes to go find something. We had all that stuff ready for the assessor. So when they asked for something, we just clicked on a tab and it was there.
Yeah, that's the way to do it right there. Just make it as easy for your assessment team and as easy for yourself as you possibly can. Absolutely. Some of our key takeaways here on this conversation, I feel like are, using proven solutions and especially proven partner solutions like MAD and Centaur and PreVeil obviously made it much easier for you guys getting through this assessment. It sounds like you definitely had a huge advantage by doing your pre-assessment, your pre-audit, so that you could really get an understanding of what the assessment was going to be like and have it run smoother when you got there. And it definitely seems like you saved time and money using these solutions. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to ask this question of Marty and Dave before we start taking some Q&A questions. If you could start this whole process all over again, and I know we don't want you to have to, but if you could start this whole process over again, is there anything you would do differently?
I mean, we're through it now, so I'm going to say no.
Right.
I like looking forward, not looking back. I don't really do that very much of that, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, in the spirit of that, what is the best piece of advice? If you had one piece of advice you could give all of our listeners out there who are getting scared about their own upcoming assessments, what piece of advice could you give them when they're preparing for this?
So I'll go first, David, and I may steal your thunder, but I would say if you're able to do an enclave or do the virtual. I don't know a lot about the virtual, but my understanding is, I know what virtual stuff is. And so that's a pretty less painful way to do it. If you're in an industry or you must get your entire organization done, you just got a lot of work to do.
Don't be afraid to explain your workflow to the assessor, because our workflows for engineering, we had a policy that says we're going to do X, and they're like, well, how do you do that? So we started explaining, they're like, well, I don't quite understand that. So we had to explain a little further how we handle engineering tasks a little bit. And then once it was in perspective for them, they got it. The other thing is, in the assessment, there are a lot of awkward pauses because those guys are making notes and doing all the things that they got to do. So it's like everybody talks and then there's a lot of dead silence, and it's okay. So
That's actually a really good point too. If you've never been through an assessment, yeah, I bet that would be a little bit off-putting, all of the quiet sounds. Definitely. And Brad, is there anything that you want to add for advice for anybody we have out there who's starting their implementation of CMMC?
I can't say it enough or stress it enough that scoping is the most important thing. Getting the scope right and making sure you focus not just on the technology of it, but what's your actual process. Because if it doesn't work, to David's point, if you have to explain how you do things and they don't make sense to the assessor at the end of the day and it breaks your operations, what good have you done? So
That right there, that is very true. Yeah, could not agree with you more, Brad. Scoping your environment again, like we talked about, if you don't know what your scope is and where that CUI is, how are you going to implement anything with CMMC? You have to know where that CUI is. It's all about that flow of CUI. So with that, I know we have a ton of questions that actually were sent in.
All right. But as you did mention, we have a ton of questions that were lined up. So here's a question that I think was kind of hit on by these last closing words that we just heard from our speakers. But did you guys struggle with scoping, and what helped in terms of being able to scope your environment?
Narrow focus.
Yeah, narrow focus. Yeah, we did struggle with it in the beginning, but there again, our partners were able to help us with that and stressing how important it is. And then we realized we can do this as an enclave. Again, if people don't know what an enclave is, we segregated this CUI environment, this CMMC environment from everything else. It doesn't even touch. It's inside our building, but it doesn't touch any of our other systems. That was a major win, I think, for the team.
Thank you for that, Marty. Here's one that I thought was would really kind of enlightening, and I think it speaks to the fact that while this is kind of a webinar focused on how LSI was able to get through their process of assessment, there's people, as we just saw in the poll, who are still just getting started and are kind of looking at this whole process with a bit of wonderment. So here's the question: what was the audit process like? Walk us through it, including key artifacts and proofs that they sought. Now, that's a very wide question, but I would ask you to kind of maybe bring out a few of the key artifacts and proofs sought. I realize it's beyond the scope of this conversation to be exhaustive in answering that question, but if you can kind of give us some of the highlights there.
First answer, when we were there, it's not an audit, it's an assessment.
Yes.
And we had to get the terminology very clear with our assessor while they were on site. He's like, if I'm auditing you, this is a whole different event than I'm assessing you against everything that you said you were going to do.
That's a very good point.
I think most of the time, and of course, this has to do with how you're set up and what you're using. We were using O365. So those logons and logging into the firewalls just to do the proofs. So a lot of it that I recall was being logged into our accounts, and then we would go there and just show them that, hey, this box is checked here, so we've told it, don't allow this or allow this, and so all those proofs, and then they would make a note or take a screenshot to put it in their file. And I don't know, the process for the assessors in the behind the scenes, but they have some kind of a QA they have to go through. And then they upload that to the government to get your actual certificate and all that going. That's what David was talking about, those awkward pauses as they're documenting all their stuff that they're then later going to do. So the process is it's relatively slow, especially if you're not prepared. That thing could take a week. We were, there again, I'll brag on my team, but they were just prepared. And so, we got comments from the assessors. I've never been through this section this fast, and stuff like that. And so I was really proud of the team.
Yeah, so we give our props to MAD for that too, because that was our last hard crush on all the prep for everything during our pre-assessment, and then post that pre-assessment and ready for the day was pulling all the final things together so that it could just absolutely flow. The worksheets out there, you know what order they're going to go down it. They don't jump, they don't skip. It's a very
ours did, yeah, for sure. Now I don't know that everybody would be that way, but I would imagine they would. But yeah, they went straight down the list.
Here's a question, another one that I think is quite interesting, and then this goes to the idea of documentation. This person asks, I'd like to get an idea of the documentation needed to pass the audit. What must be included, any format, recommendations, etc.
Well, you have to have the SSP for sure. The way our team did it is, so you have your SSP, and then you have the proof is in that SSP. It'll describe what's necessary, and then you just go. Some of the stuff you have to do live. But if you can just go get a screenshot of a log or whatever the proof is, you just go get it and you put it in there, and then that gets you prepared for the audit. So the documentation, some of it's live, a lot of it's screenshots. Most everything is electronic. The only other proof was when they came on site and we had to prove to them that what we had told them our enclave looked like, it looked like. And that was just them checking 6 or 8 boxes, I think, when they came on site.
Here's a question that I think people will also find very insightful. And it's, what were some of the pitfalls that you found on the journey? And do you have any knowledge or free tools that you found which can help SMBs achieve compliance? And that's a question I would also pose to MAD if they have knowledge here that they think would be helpful.
As far as, yeah, I was gonna say, as far as tools of how to I will say one thing that I've seen clients that have tried to do this and then seen very popular is that a GRC tool is not going to solve your documentation problem. It is a tool that can help you, but you still have to do those things, input those things, and then understand the output. You're not just going to magically get something and be ready to go. I think that would be where don't seek out the technology first. I think I keep saying this, but it goes back to scoping and understanding those processes and then working from that. Because don't try to just take what someone has prescribed to you and try to fit it into what you do. It may or may not, more than likely will not work in that context. So while there are many tools to use out there, some of them free, some of them paid for, my suggestion at the onset is to look what the scope is and then look for those tools that fit your need.
There were a few tools that we had to purchase through this process that had more to do with scanning our network and logging things. And forgive me, I don't recall the brands that we chose in the end, but they were let's say the 5-star brand. We didn't go get some open source something or whatever. These were all things that people use for these their purpose-built pieces of software and tools. But other than those kind of things, I think we had everything we needed.
Right. Noelle, here's a question that I think you are most perfectly equipped to answer. How did PreVeil help with compliance if NIST is met by putting CUI in an enclave? And I'm correcting myself. I think everyone in this panel can be able to answer. How did putting the CUI in the enclave save on work for the remaining controls that PreVeil does not cover?
Yeah, I think Marty could take that one because it sounds like you guys had a very narrow scope.
Well, so that's one of the things that we kind of scoped out through policy and procedure. We only allow CUI to be, intake of CUI to be through PreVeil. It's our only solution. I don't even recall, David, I'm sure we had to prove that, right? Just by stating it, that's
Right.
how we sort of prove it. So then we had training videos, and in our training video, we inform our employees, if you're on a CUI project, you're not allowed to, let somebody hand you CUI or whatever. We don't have a policy for transport of it and all that kind of stuff. And that was, but now we're an engineering firm. So if you're a different kind of place, you might have to have transport policies and that kind of thing. We were able to scope that out and it helped us.
All right.
Tremendously.
I don't know if I answered that question properly, but I rambled a little bit, but anyway, I'm trying.
You did a great job. No, it was the right answer.
All right. We have a lot more questions. So many questions, so little time. So I think we'll have time for maybe one, maybe two more. So here's an important one on the follow-up after a CMMC assessment. What are the ongoing tasks you need to do to ensure CMMC compliance is taken care of on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
From the government side, you have to do a self-assessment every year. And then every 3rd year, I think it is. So we hadn't been down that road that far. I think in 3 years, we have to do another external assessment, a C3PAO assessment. And then after the assessment, you have to hash the documents and you can't change them. That's the way they're proven. It's kind of using blockchain technology, but they're proven that you haven't changed any policies. Or if you do change a policy, you have to self-assess against it. So is that answering that question properly? So
Right.
there's not a lot. You have to self-assess once a year, I believe it is. And then every third year you have to do another assessment.
Yeah, what about
That's-
those day-to-day tasks or those weekly tasks? So things like that audit log review you were referencing, for example. So do you just stop doing all those things that you did for prep of the assessment and then just wait until right before the next assessment to start doing them again?
Well, no, I mean, so most of the logs, those happen automatically and we just we store those. And then there again, we have MAD is doing our SOT services. So they're maintaining those logs and we have to prove that we have so we had a camera system and those, so all that stuff is being logged already. So there's nothing really for us to do there other than if we need to go access some of that, it needs to be there. So there's not a lot of like day to day, somebody has to get up in the morning and go do X, Y, and Z. It mostly happens, I guess I'll say it's automated,
It sounds like working with MAD. Yeah, Brad, if you want to speak to that a little bit too.
Yeah, I can. So there's multiple different things that come into play, and one is the ongoing monitoring of logs. Right, that's an important piece of it, not just for compliance but security. But then when you get into it, there's the continuous monitoring piece, and something that they had to share was a continuous monitoring plan that they'd be executing over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. As part of that is a bunch of tasks that you say you're going to do annually. Right, you got training. You have tabletop exercises for your incident response plan. You have risk assessments. You have all these things that are usually annually, or they may be twice a year, depending on what it is. Those things have to be accounted for so that when you get to your self-assessment, you can easily say, hey, we just went through all the controls in a year. Here is our self-assessment to that. And then on that third year, you need to probably do a dry run and be ready for it, but you have all that supporting evidence because you've been doing it.
Exactly. That's what it is. It's about living it and doing it. And it looks like we're at time. So I unfortunately don't have any more time for any more questions, really.
No, unfortunately not. We are at time. Thank you very much to our panelists, Noel, of course, first and foremost, our guest from LSI and from MAD Security, Marty, Dave, and Brad. Thank you so much for joining us today and looking forward to having future meetings with you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Gus.
Bye-bye.